You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's Friday, April 5th. I'm Sachi McClendon.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield. The shed opens tonight in Hudson Yards. The art complex costs just under $500 million.
A lot of money that the city takes is not being used for what it should be used for.
Rikers is closing. It sits on hundreds of acres of land.
Using 1/4 of Rikers Island for solar power could replace every power plant that has been built in the last 20 years.
If you've been on your phone lately, this voice might sound familiar.
This call is pertaining to the notice you recently received on your electric bill about a rate reduction.
A group of lawmakers are introducing a bill to ban robocalls, the first of its kind in the country.
Last night, Governor Cuomo appointed 19 lawyers to provide free legal services to immigrants. I spoke to an immigration lawyer to see whether that's enough. All of that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. In his first speech since being called out by several women for being too touchy-feely in his public interactions, Joe Biden attempted to inject a little levity. As NPR's Don Gagné reports, the former vice president later acknowledged the women's concerns, but stopped short of apologizing.
At a speech before a union group in D.C., Biden first addressed the controversy with a joke. The union president embraced him as he took the stage, prompting Biden to tell the audience he had permission for the hug. Afterward, Biden spoke with reporters and explained he wasn't making light of anyone's discomfort. Asked if he still owed those who've complained a direct apology, Biden said he's sorry he didn't understand he'd made people uncomfortable. Then added,
I'm not sorry for any of my intentions. I'm not sorry for anything that I have ever done. I've never been disrespectful intentionally to a man or a woman.
Biden is still not officially a candidate for 2020, saying an announcement is coming very soon. Don Gagné, NPR News, Washington.
Biden may have energized the crowd of union electricians, but President Trump predicts via Twitter today that come 2020, those workers will be in his corner. This hour, though, the president is in California near the southern border talking tighter immigration. Heading up a roundtable discussion in Calexico, Trump's attempting to drum up support for an emergency declaration and a border wall.
I want to state that there is indeed an emergency on our southern border. It's been loud and clear. We're in court, and a lot of people aren't even bringing too many of the suits anymore. A lot of people are going to bring a suit. Pretty hard for them to say there's not an emergency. We have a big emergency at our southern border.
California and 19 additional states are challenging the declaration in court, calling the diversion of government funds toward a border wall an unconstitutional use of taxpayer money. U.S. employers added 196,000 jobs last month. NPR's Scott Horsley reports a monthly snapshot from the Labor Department shows the economy is still growing, although not as fast as it was last year.
The March jobs report offers a healthy dose of reassurance after a lackluster showing the month before. Revised figures show employers added just 33,000 jobs in February, but Chief Economist Nariman Baravesh of IHS Markit says the overall labor market is much stronger than that figure would suggest.
That number in February was a fluke. It was very weak, and it wasn't representative of the underlying momentum of the U.S. economy, which is slowing, but nowhere near that much.
An average of the last 3 months shows the U.S. adding about 180,000 jobs a month, down from 233,000 at the end of 2018. Unemployment is holding steady at a low 3.8%, while average wages have been rising, just over 3%. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
This is NPR.
Last night, Governor Cuomo announced the appointment of 19 immigration lawyers. They'll provide free representation to immigrants throughout the state. I spoke to Amy Belcher, an immigration lawyer with New York Civil Liberties Union, about what this initiative means. Hi, Amy. How are you?
Hi, Hannah. I'm doing well.
So, only 19 lawyers for the entire state. Put this into context for us. Is this necessary?
It is absolutely necessary, and in fact, the stakes could not be higher. This is especially true in the context of detained immigrants, where a recent study has shown that only 3% of detained unrepresented immigrants avoid deportation. If you are represented by an attorney, your chances of winning and being able to remain in the United States increase by 1,000%.
But it's only 19 lawyers for the entire state, correct? Is that enough?
It's not enough. No, absolutely not. Obviously, there's a need to increase this funding to ensure that every immigrant who's detained in New York State has representation.
Who are these immigrants?
So they come from all over. A large number of them are from Latin America, but there are also a high number of immigrants, for example, from Africa and from different countries in Europe and from all over.
And when it comes to providing legal counsel to immigrants, how does New York compare to other states?
It's mostly been cities that have enacted similar immigrant defense projects. For example, California has been a leader on this, and cities in the Bay Area specifically have been doing this for a number of years as well. But aside from New York and California, I think that there are very few states that are providing free legal counsel for immigrants.
Can you talk a little bit about how New York City compares to the rest of the state when it comes to providing these services?
There's a much higher likelihood of being able to find quality representation here in New York City versus the rest of the state. But those attorneys are also incredibly overworked.
What is New York State saying to the federal government by providing free legal services to immigrants within this system?
I think that the message here is that immigrants are entitled to due process and they have a right to counsel, that if the federal government is unwilling to provide, New York State or New York City will provide.
And that right to due process is under the Constitution?
No constitutional court has yet to find that there's a constitutional right to an attorney in an immigration proceeding, but we would argue certainly that due process is violated in a case where an immigrant has to defend themselves. To give you an example, a child, say 7 years old and speaks no English, is forced to navigate an incredibly complex court system on their own. And how is that constitutional?
Thank you so much, Amy.
Of course.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Sachi McClendon.
And I'm Hannah Critchfield.
The Shed opens tonight. That's New York City's newest art institution. It's inside the $20 billion Hudson Yards development on Manhattan's far west side. And as Camille Peterson finds, reactions to it are mixed.
The Shed is at the end of the High Lines walking path, and you can't miss it. It takes up more than half the block. It's mostly glass, but partly covered by a steel shell that looks like a quilted blanket. It's the day of the Shed's opening, but the building still sounds a little like a construction site mixed with a middle school band rehearsal. James Pugh showed up at 10 this morning, hoping it would be open to the public.
I wanted to get here before the crowds arrived.
But it wasn't. Still, Pugh is excited about the Shed. He doesn't mind that it cost nearly $500 million.
Peanuts for what they're getting.
Most of the funding for the Shed came from private donations, but a report from the New School's economics department found that the city spent $76 million on the project. Zachary Small is an art critic and writer. Small worries the Shed is a big trophy for Hudson Yards, a way for the luxury development to claim it's doing something good for the city.
The Shed didn't need to be built. There are many other art institutions around the Shed, like Lincoln Center, that are providing the community the same resources. The only difference is that the Shed is a shiny new building.
Scott Larson teaches urban studies at CUNY. He says projects like the Shed attract capital from investors and draw in tourists.
But is that really what the people of New York want? I don't think anybody asked the people of New York.
And Larson says there's a better way to expand the arts in New York City.
Using public space for art would be a great idea, but that doesn't require an investment of millions of dollars. There are plenty of street artists and community artists who could use some support and help.
Hours before the Shed opens, construction workers are still sweeping up debris with big industrial brooms. Andre Jackson is a lifelong New Yorker. He also showed up early to check out the Shed, and he's not so sure it's the best use of city resources.
A lot of money that the city takes is not being used for what it should be used for.
The Shed's first show is tonight. It's a Steve McQueen-directed concert. Tickets are sold out, but selling for later dates at $95 each. Camille Peterson, Columbia Radio News.
Uptown Radio reached out to the Shed for comment, but has not heard back.
With the Shed now open in Hudson Yards, a new, even larger piece of property may open up across the city, more than 400 acres. But there's a catch. The land is on Rikers Island. As the city discusses its plan to close the jail, some are already eyeing the area. Maggie Green learns what the future of Rikers Island may hold.
The land on Rikers Island could be worth a lot. John Squires is a broker with Cushman & Wakefield. He says the land could be worth somewhere in the realm of a few $1 billion in affordable housing units.
So there is significant value there. It's just, I think, a question as to what the city deems the best use.
Retail, infrastructure, or housing. He says some New Yorkers can't be picky about where they live.
There are all sorts of properties that people are currently living in or on, funeral homes or houses of worship, that there might be some sort of stigma or superstition to, but New Yorkers seem to get over it pretty quickly.
Take Gowanus. It's a super fun site, but condos there can go for over $1 million. Lawyer Melissa Yachan says the land on Rikers would be better used in other ways. She works for the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, and she says housing on Rikers is a no-go.
Because that island is toxic. It's inhabitable for humans, which is why the detainees currently housed there need to come out as soon as possible.
At a panel discussion at the New School this morning presenting ideas for the future of Rikers, she reminded the audience that the prison is built on a landfill. She has a different vision for the island.
It's the place where you can build solar panels, because solar panels aren't people.
City Councilman Costa Constantinides represents the Queens district that includes Rikers. He sees the land as tailor-made for green infrastructure. He says Western Queens and areas of the South Bronx bear the burden of the city's energy needs, with power plants and wastewater treatment centers on their shorelines. He has another idea.
Using 1/4 of Rikers Island for solar power could replace every power plant that has been built in the last 20 years.
Constantinides says that by opening up solar farms and new, more efficient treatment centers on Rikers, the city could start cleaning the water and the air in nearby areas. That would mean these outdated power plants on the Queens and Bronx coasts could close, leaving room.
Building affordable housing in those locations, I think, makes sense much more in the long term.
But these are just ideas. Other previously closed prisons in New York City offer a clue for what might happen. In the Bronx, the former Spofford Juvenile Detention Center will become a development with affordable housing, community, and retail space. In Chelsea, the Bayview Correctional Facility will soon become a home for groups that elevate women's rights. And in Staten Island, the production company Broadway Stages bought the Arthur Kill Correctional Facility to use as a movie set. Spokesperson Warren Cohen says the Broadway Stages doesn't need another prison.
But I wouldn't be surprised if one of the other local production companies wants to pick up a prison for themselves too, because it's pretty cool.
Maybe Rikers.
Who knows?
Another idea came from Olympia Kazi, who sat in the audience of today's panel at the New School.
Maybe Amazon wants to go there. What do we know?
Rikers won't close until 2027, so residents and policymakers have some time to think about these options. Maggie Green, Columbia Radio News.
In our continuing series, Sounds of the City, Sophia Amati introduces us to a man who's always thinking one step ahead.
I used to watch my dad and my uncle play, and I used to be like, well, what are these guys really battling over on this board? So I'm looking at this guy with the cross, I'm looking at this guy with a bubble, but this guy with the knight is really blowing my mind. I don't know what he's really doing, but I like him the most.
Carl Neblett, chess counselor, Gramercy Park.
This knight is never impeded. He has an exceptional ability to hop over obstacles, which we all can relate to in life. What I've discovered is that no one can actually have a monopoly in this game. It's truly a game of intellect and precise calculations. Knowledge is simply a tool. One mustn't acquire knowledge just to keep it to themselves or to keep it locked up and contained. You must share this knowledge, because that's the fruit in making this world a better place.
You're listening to Columbia Radio News online Fridays at 4 p.m.
Your phone rings. It's a number you don't recognize, and you answer it.
This call is pertaining to the notice you recently received on your electric bill about a rate reduction.
If it seems like you're getting lots of robocalls lately, you're right. According to UMail, a national index, New Yorkers received 175 million calls in the last month alone. That's nearly 60% more than last year. In March, state politicians introduced a bill that could ban the automated calls. Maddie Foley has more.
Inez Catan and her friend Amber are standing outside their office building on Wall Street, scrolling through their phones. Amber points to a number registered in Houston.
And that's another one, that's another one, another one, another one. This number actually called my work number first and hung up and then called my cell phone number.
I literally just changed my number 2 weeks ago, and Monday I got my first robocall on my new number. How?
New York is one of the most targeted cities in the country by robocallers. And it turns out there's a reason for that.
New York City is one of the chief cities to get robocalls, but it's because there's money and people here. As a famous bank robber from the 1920s said, I rob banks because it's where the money is.
That's Richard Berkeley, who runs New York's Public Utility Law Project. He says robocall scams often target vulnerable populations, like low-income communities, with urgent messages to pay bills or fake warnings from the IRS.
Or they'll say, your service is about to be shut off. You have to get together your cash, go out and buy a gift card because we'll only take it in cash right now over the phone. And, they lose money that might have paid for their children's medicine.
Robocallers also target recent immigrants with threats about visa issues in a language they may not understand. Lawrence Hong, chief of staff for Manhattan Assemblyperson Yulin Yu, says it's hard to measure the total financial loss for New Yorkers, but there are statistics for one roboscam in particular.
I think the Chinese Consulate General scam from last year alone was probably pushing about $20 million.
The cost of robocalls to member news constituents have led her to sponsor a statewide bill to stop them. The Robocall Prevention Act would be the country's first statewide ban.
It would eliminate a lot of the calls that are scam calls. So it just prohibits any person or, I guess, an entity from making robocalls to any telephone number that's owned by anyone in New York.
But while the Robocall Prevention Act may be popular among robo-weary New Yorkers, the bill is facing pushback. Politicians and unions see robocalls as an important tool for reaching constituents. Making them all illegal, they say, violates their First Amendment rights. Matt Nelligan is chief of staff for Upstate's Senator Funke, one of the bill's more vocal opponents.
We believe that restricting them could be unconstitutional in terms of preventing communication with folks. It's like taking a hatchet to a problem that deserves a scalpel.
But Lawrence Hong from Member News Office argues it's a problem that might deserve a hatchet.
This is a very important communication tool in this new era that we have, but at the same time, it's being abused heavily.
The bill recently cleared its first hurdle in becoming law, passing through the state's Telecommunications Committee. Now, legislators from both sides of the argument are working to refine the bill's language. Maddie Foley, Uptown Radio.
New York State is moving closer to legalizing recreational marijuana. If it does, it will create a new marketplace. State and local lawmakers are considering ways to make sure that small business owners, especially people of color, will be able to compete with large corporations. Moira Warburton explores one proposed solution.
Stephen Fan is a small business owner. Come Back Daily, a dispensary in Tribeca.
My name is Stephen Fan. I'm one of the founders here at the shop.
If you notice Fan sounds relaxed, it's because he just drank a CBD-infused orange-flavored tincture. CBD is a non-psychoactive element of the marijuana plant. That means it won't get you high. The store has whitewashed walls with racks filled with lollipops, essential oils, and tea. Fan opened the store last fall. He's concerned about competition from big businesses.
It'd be challenging because they have unlimited money pretty much. I don't have that.
The legal marijuana market in New York State is projected to be worth over $3 billion. Lawmakers are trying to figure out how to make sure small businesses, like Fans, as well as people of color, are included in the benefits. One fix suggested by a New York City Council committee? A ban on vertical integration. Andy Novick, co-founder of the New York Small Farm Alliance of Cannabis Growers, explains the process.
Okay, so vertical integration means that one company can control it from, I forget the saying for that.
That saying is seed to sell.
From the growing to the processing, producing whatever products they're going to the selling, all of the aspects of profit is controlled by one company.
You can't ban big companies, but you can put limits on them. Figuring out how to do that has got local lawmakers concerned.
When vertical integration has been permitted in states, you see a few corporations getting bigger and bigger, controlling everything.
In Colorado and Washington, that meant small businesses suffered. In Washington state, which allows vertical integration, retail prices of legal cannabis dropped from $35 a gram to $7.50 in just a few years. The lower revenue devastated small companies. Matt Carnes is founder of Green Wave Advisors, a financial research firm in the cannabis industry. He says there's an economic incentive to vertical integration. There's a benefit to having all elements of the process under one roof.
You also have access and you gain intelligence on your customers, and that lends itself to the research and development and innovation and really getting a better sense of what the customer wants.
Without that integration,
the left hand might not necessarily know what the right hand is doing.
But black lawmakers in Albany say the benefits aren't worth it. Vertically integrated companies require a lot of capital to start. The lawmakers want to ensure the market stays favorable to small businesses, which tend to be more accessible to people of color. Dashita Dawson is president of Flora Buffalo, a cannabis tech company. She'd like to see the industry include more leaders like her, a woman of color.
The reality is that it's abysmal in terms of the percentage. Last time I was having a conversation about it, I believe we were quoting 1% as ownership.
She says even the fact that the black lawmakers' concerns are being taken seriously marks a big change from earlier legalization efforts. States like California didn't. They had to implement inclusivity measures retroactively.
It wasn't until New York and New Jersey really came into play that we were talking about day one equity from a legalized market.
Still, Dawson and Andy Novick from the Small Farm Alliance agree that some vertical integration is fine, as long as room is left for small businesses and people of color to succeed.
We're just saying you can't do all of the things. You can't get that large. It's more to level the playing field, actually.
Governor Cuomo has committed to legalizing recreational cannabis in New York by June. Moira Warburton, Columbia Radio News. In 2016, the dating app Tinder began offering pronoun choices beyond the dual male or female. Now, users can choose from a whole spectrum of identities, including transgender, pangender, and gender nonconforming. But as Sachi McClendon reports, users are still forced to make one binary decision.
MXD, MixD, 24, Harvard Law School, gender nonconforming, less than a kilometer away. Read me.
Dee Dangaran is reading their old Tinder bio.
Hawaii born.
Dee doesn't identify as either male or female.
Flag. They, them, their pronouns. Rainbow flag. If you don't want to be seen in public with me, move on. Touch is my love language.
Dee used to be on Tinder regularly.
I traveled a lot in college, so I liked to use Tinder not only for hookups, but also for getting to meet people who were locals, to learn a little bit about which gay clubs are good.
When Dee first downloaded Tinder back in 2012, they identified as a gay male. And they had both good and bad experiences on the app, like most young people in this brave new world of online dating. But a few years ago, Dee came out as trans on Tinder. Now, rather than appearing as a male seeking other men, Dee would show up as a woman in other men's results. That's when they started getting reported by other users.
And Tinder did these kind of temporary bans on my profile where they would freeze my account, it would put me temporarily under review, and they would have to look into the incident. And that happened, I'd say, about 7 or 8 times.
Eventually, Dee got kicked off the app for good. They believe it's because they are trans. I reached out to Tinder for comment, but the company did not respond to my emails.
So gender is, this big, messy human thing. The technology isn't even attempting to grapple with that.
That's Caitlin McLeod. She researches the intersection of gender and technology.
Bumble and Tinder now have the option to put something other than just man, woman. But when you do that, then they both say, okay, but now which search results do you want to appear in? And that's still binary.
According to McLeod, Tinder collects our data and sells it. And categorizing users into neat piles, like do you want to be seen by men or by women, makes the data scraping process much easier. But that ignores the complexity of gender. Rachel Phillips is a product designer for apps just like Tinder. She says the company has the ability to change.
In this way, I think the Tinder algorithm needs to be more complex and more flexible in order to adapt to the way that we think about ourselves.
As more people are looking to find partners online, being kicked off a dating site takes away your potential to find love.
I think that it's impossible to try to put words to why relationships matter, because for so many people, it's just a part of their normal life. You don't experience the same kind of just denigration and invisibility that I experience as a transgender person in most of my life.
But Dee says they refuse to be erased. After Harvard Law, while they aren't going to focus on finding love, Dee hopes to represent transgender prisoners throughout the U.S. Sachi McClendon, Columbia Radio News. Reporter Rebecca Ward has lived most of her adult life on the move, traveling from city to city, country to country. In the latest installment of our commentary series, she tells us how she learned to pack well.
When I was a kid, I carried my life in a giant black duffel bag. Like many kids, my parents were divorced. They split when I was 8 and finished with the courts 4 years later. Lucky for me, they both stayed in my hometown, Montreal. But I soon felt like the ball on a pendulum, with my school building in the middle. Moms, school, dads, school, moms. They both would have loved if I just kept a few things at each home. But I had my own way of doing things. The duffel bag was about the size of my body, one of those hockey bags that you saw everywhere in my city, with a long zipper running up the middle. No good for your back, but great for fitting all the skates and padding you need. Or, in my case, lip gloss, hair dryers, Madeleine L'Engle books, a Discman, and way too many t-shirts. It used to sit by my bed, ruffled but rarely unpacked. My brother was much more logical about it all. At my dad's place, he kept his rock collection. At my mom's, his sports trophies. I remember his encyclopedias sitting open on the floor when he left, saving the page until he got back. Maybe he was better adjusted about it all. Or maybe, at 4 years old, the divorce had left him without memories of a home base. I did have them, though. Not just memories, but nostalgia, twisted up with fierce independence, and that meant mine was a different world order. I took pride in being flexible and nimble. The bag was a heavy load to carry, but doable, and it proved that I could always be ready for change. I jumped in and later figured out how to hit the ground running. I adapted to a split household, slipped between the worlds of the jocks, the nerds, and the punks, blended in as well at the club as in book club. In college, I was a basketball player, and that came with a duffel bag too, this time with my name and jersey number embroidered into the side. Ward, 22. It traveled with me to away games every week, and like my childhood hockey bag, I kept it perma-packed by my dorm room bunk bed at all times, just in case. After college, I ran off to Europe on a research fellowship. I bought a car, a Navy Chevy Alero, with a near stranger. We would live in that car for over 6 months, driving each day to a new town. The trunk became my next duffel bag, packed with a heap of all our worldly possessions. Twisted up sleeping bags, one blue, one red, emergency cheese slices, the books that people kept pawning off on us along the way, and then my wardrobe, more streamlined than in childhood. A blue t-shirt, a black dress shirt, a pair of jeans, my running shoes. With all this movement, I never really knew if I was running towards something or away. The frenetic pace continued when I moved to New York City for the first time 5 years ago. I got a job on a Friday that started the following Monday. In 2 days, I'd packed up my bins and boxes, piled into a little gray Jetta, and drove to my fresh start. A year or so later, I moved into the 3rd floor of a Chinatown walk-up, and I caught my breath. Bought potted plants, cooked fried rice on weeknights. Bought furniture for the first time. I stayed there 2 years and 1 month. Then I moved on again. I left for East Timor, then Colombia, changed careers, started a master's, changed jobs again. Since then, I've never completely unpacked. But now, when I travel, I can sometimes fit everything I need into a gray Samsonite carry-on with a sticky handle. It slides perfectly into the overhead bin of an airplane. Rebecca Ward, Columbia Radio News.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
listening to Uptown Radio.
I'm Hannah Critchfield.
And I'm Sachi McClendon.
Last week, the New York City Comptroller released a report slighting the city for failing to meet goals set to help businesses owned by women and minorities. Other city administrators dispute the findings.
WrestleMania, the Super Bowl of the sport, is coming to MetLife Stadium this Sunday. This year, for the first time, women will take center stage in their own featured fights.
These stories and more coming up. First, the headlines.
From Columbia Radio News, I'm Allie Swenson. President Donald Trump is in Southern California today. He's touring a section of border fence that was recently replaced.
Our country is full. Our area is full. The sector is full. Can't take you anymore. I'm sorry. Can't happen. So turn around. That's the way it is.
Democrats say they're ready to sue Trump to stop him from using congressional dollars on border fencing. Former Vice President Joe Biden appeared in public for the first time today since several women accused him of behavior that made them uncomfortable. Reporters asked if he wanted to apologize.
I'm sorry I didn't understand more. I'm not sorry for any of my intentions. I'm not sorry for anything that I have ever done. I've never been disrespectful intentionally.
Earlier today, at a union event, Biden made light of the allegations, assuring crowds he had permission to hug the union president. The U.S. economy is looking up. The Labor Department's job report showed that American employers added 196,000 new jobs in March. That's almost 6 times February's number. A preliminary report analyzing the plane crash in Ethiopia last month found pilots followed procedures. It was faulty equipment that contributed to the fatal crash. Boeing, which makes the aircraft, is now considering a slowdown in production, according to Reuters. British Prime Minister Theresa May requested another Brexit extension today until June 30th. Otherwise, Parliament will have just a week to decide how to leave the EU. Israeli footballer Isaac Hayek got a special award after his game today. He's the oldest professional soccer player in the world. Hayek turns 74 next week, and he says he's ready for another game. If soccer's not your thing, the final 4 teams in college basketball's March Madness tournament will face off this weekend. Virginia versus Auburn and Michigan State against Texas Tech. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Allie Swenson.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Hannah Critchfield.
And I'm Sachi McClendon.
When women go to work, on average, they're paid far less than men. New York City wants to help close the gender gap with a program backing businesses owned by women and minorities. But according to a comptroller's report released last week, the program hasn't come close to meeting its goals. Bianca Jacobone reports.
Every April for the past 13 years, women have rallied in front of City Hall on Equal Pay Day, the day that marks how far into 2019 women have to work to make as much money as white men did during the previous year. Union leaders, politicians, and workers stand on the step dressed in red and holding bright green balloons that symbolize dollars. Corey Johnson is the Speaker of City Council. He says Latinas have the biggest pay gap of all. For every $1 a white man makes, they earn less than half. And they take even longer to catch up.
Equal pay day for Hispanic women, we won't get there until November. Until November. That is wrong, and that is racist.
Fanny Mairena is the founder of Latinas in New York, a networking platform for Latinas in business. She used to work in tech, where she says she was consistently paid less than her male colleagues.
And I was the only girl, especially Latina woman there. And it looks like you are being ignored and you're not being valued. I think it's the worst thing that has happened to Latina these days, for years.
Many other Latinas are stuck in low-wages jobs. Will McGrew is a researcher at Washington Center for Equitable Growth. He says one way to fix the problem is to encourage businesses to hire Latinas.
And so you also need to take action to concretely incentivize employers to increase their representations of Latino workers at all levels, but specifically in professions and roles that are the highest paying and the most prestigious.
The city is trying to do just that. Every year, the city government spends billions to buy everything from staplers to construction contracts. A program called Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprises, or MWBE, promises a big chunk of those contracts to businesses owned by women and minorities. The program has been around for almost 15 years, but its success is being questioned. A report released by the comptroller gave the city a D+ for fiscal year 2018 because they say the program didn't come close to meet its goals.
I think we're sort of in a place where we're tired of that. I think women are tired of that. I think people of color are tired of that.
Wendy Garcia is the comptroller's chief diversity officer. She says for the program to really work, it's going to take some administrative changes. She wants a chief diversity officer for the whole city.
You have someone that will hold the institution accountable around equity. When you make a decision, you have someone, a cop on the beat, that's asking how this impacts women and people of color.
The mayor's office disagrees. They say they're on track to meet their goals, that the comptroller's report is miscalculated. Magali Austin is the chief diversity officer for the City Department of Design and Construction. Rather than administrative changes, she would like to see more flexibility in the program.
I like to say, better tools in our toolbox that gives us flexibility in terms of how we buy services. I think the city would not only meet its goal, but probably exceed its goal.
The city has a goal to award 30% of its contract to businesses owned by women and minorities by 2021. Bianca Giacobone, Columbia Radio News.
The Army Corps of Engineers is proposing solutions to reduce damage from the next superstorm like Sandy. Options include giant gates, which could close off the Hudson, and seawalls along the shoreline to stave off flooding. But citizens and researchers have concerns over possible adverse effects the projects may have on marine environments surrounding the city. Rebecca Ward reports.
Bill Lockwood's family owns a full-service marina in South Amboy, New Jersey. He says he'll never forget the day Sandy hit.
5.5 feet of water inside of that shop at the height of the storm. And the water basically came up all the way past up to where those trailers are right there, those containers that far up.
Lockwood lost a lot of equipment that day, from fiberglass cloth and paints to heavy machinery and electrics. He also says that about 150 boats floated off their blocks, a number getting totaled in the marshes. It took the business 2 years to recover, he says, and some things are still getting back to normal. And that's with his team of 7 sisters, 2 brothers, 3 nephews, 1 niece, and 15 other employees helping out.
I remember one person asked me, well, what are you going to do? I said, you got no choice. What do you mean, what am I going to do? I'm going to pick up and keep going. It's everybody's livelihood. So, and it cost, but we're here.
He's worried about what the next storm might do.
I know we're all aware of it. Every one of my brothers and sisters, what can happen again? It can happen again, for sure.
And that's what these solutions proposed by the U.S. Army Corps are meant to prevent. But environmental groups like Riverkeeper, 70 miles up the Hudson from South Amboy, are worried about their downstream effects. Habitat Restoration Manager George Jackman thinks that particularly worrying would be massive gates in the water, which would factor into several Army Corps options.
Every single species of migratory fish in the Hudson River is now in decline. So that's why we're concerned about these barriers.
He says that no matter what preemptive studies are done, it's impossible to introduce large structures to the seafloor without hurting the marine ecosystem.
Once you adjust this whole circulation pattern of the Hudson River, all the invertebrate blue crabs, just to name a few.
Jackson is worried that this will destroy the Hudson. But Malcolm Bowman is not.
Now, nothing's further from the truth, and if I thought, as a scientist, as a physicist, as an engineer, as an environmental scientist, that was the case, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing.
Bowman teaches at Stony Brook's School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. He says drastic measures are necessary. After Sandy, he brought together volunteers into the Metropolitan New York-New Jersey Storm Surge Working Group. They were the ones to first suggest the largest scale of the Army Corps plans, the one that Jackson and Riverkeeper are most worried about. That giant gate in the water between New Jersey and Queens with a smaller gate in the Bronx. If another Sandy were to hit, The gates could be closed, blocking the storm. It would protect the most territory, people, and property of all the plans. It's also the most expensive, estimated at nearly $70 billion. All of this has come up in recent public meetings, like this one at a community center not far from Lockwood's Marina. It insists that if all options are environmentally unacceptable according to the law, it will not build at all. Daria Mazie, from the Army Corps, says the study will be comprehensive.
It will include migratory birds, it will include fish, it will include benthic species and everything.
Even benthic species, creatures that live on the seafloor. But if the Corps determines not to build, or even if it opts for a smaller scale, environmentally safer option, neighborhoods in this part of New Jersey could land underwater. In that case, there's another option, buyouts. Lockwood thinks this sounds more logical, more cost-effective, but he's not sure about his neighbors.
How do you think the people around here would react to the idea that they would be part of a buyout?
I think they'd feel pretty second-class citizen if that was the case. A lot of families have been here for, obviously, decades, even more.
The Army Corps plans to release its first environmental impact survey in March 2020. Rebecca Ward, Columbia Radio News.
WrestleMania is coming to MetLife Stadium this Sunday. For fans of wrestling, it's the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, and the Academy Awards all rolled into one. This is also the first time women will be featured in the main wrestling match. I spoke with Dan Murphy, author of Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, about female wrestlers and the changing role of women in the ring. WrestleMania is just around the corner this Sunday. It's the first time a women's match will be the main event. But before we get talking about this historic moment, let's go back to the beginning. How did women first get involved in wrestling?
Women have actually been involved with wrestling really dating back to really the 1890s, into the 19-teens. Back in the early days of pro wrestling, it was just something that was kind of done on the carnival circuit, strongman basically wrestling against a local competitor or against another person moving from town to town on the midway. And people liked seeing women wrestle as well. A lot of times it was a woman wrestling against her husband who was a plant in the audience, sometimes against another woman. It was a special kind of commodity and attraction. And as wrestling developed, women's wrestling kind of did in a parallel and slower course. But it's always been there. It's had its highs and lows, and right now we're seeing a real historic high in the popularity of women's pro wrestling.
So what was the fandom's reaction when it was announced that 3 women would be battling it out on the main stage at WrestleMania?
The fans actually reacted to it fairly well because it happened organically. Ronda Rousey last year after
and who's Ronda Rousey, sorry?
Summer, she had her... Ronda Rousey is a former UFC champion who's now the WWE Raw Women's Champion. She wrestled her first WWE match last year at WrestleMania and quickly became WWE's most popular star.
So have historically women been taken seriously as true professional wrestlers?
Not at all, no. This is new for wrestling, with women being put in the main event spot at WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year. And the women having the main event spot. It's completely historic and unprecedented, at least in the United States. Japan did a big show just featuring women wrestlers back in the 90s. It drew about 70,000 people, but that was kind of a rare attraction. In recent years, from the 80s, especially in the 90s and 2000s, the women were really the kind of eye candy. They used to have, WWE used to have bra and panties matches. And the women would have about 3 matches to just kind of show off and look sexy, and that was about it. This is completely different. WWE is really trying to present the women as fully fleshed and developed characters. They're athletic, they are strikers, they're good wrestlers, and they're being portrayed as serious athletes.
Great. So how did women go from being this like eye candy in the 90s to being taken as serious pro wrestlers?
I mean, number one, times have changed. The 90s was a time of kind of Girls Gone Wild and Maxim magazine and things like that, and our culture's kind of changed. We've gotten a little bit more woke. But one of the big people who deserves a lot of credit is Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey went out and succeeded in UFC and became one of the biggest draws in mixed martial arts in pay-per-view. And that really showed that there is a market out there of fans who are willing to pay money to watch women compete.
I want to hit my most important question. Who will you be rooting for on Sunday?
I'll be rooting for Becky Lynch.
And does she have like a tagline, a good saying that you know of?
Really? Well, not so much a tagline, but she calls herself the man.
The man.
To take off from Ric Flair. Yeah, to be the man, you have to beat the man, and now she is the man.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Well, thanks so much for talking with me. I really, really appreciate it. That was Dan Murphy, author of Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, on the history of women wrestlers.
The Metropolitan Museum of Art is rolling out the red carpet for their newest exhibition on Monday. Instead of the usual fine art or sculpture, they're including musical instruments from what is perhaps America's loudest cultural achievement, rock and roll. Stephanie Horton reports.
Guitars encased in glass line the white-walled gallery. You might think these guitars would be museum quality and untouched, but these are the relics of the rock and roll life.
It's beautiful. Like, look how, beat up it is. They worked, man. They really worked.
Mick Parrish is a 31-year-old musician who recently moved to New York. He is touring the exhibition with a kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for kids on Christmas morning. He stops in front of a guitar. It's worn, acoustic, played by Wanda Jackson with a leather strap and the neck is warped. It's not pretty, but for Mick, the uniqueness makes it even more special.
It doesn't look like any other guitar.
What does it look like?
It looks like a different guitar from every other guitar. And it's got a name on it.
The exhibition exists for people like Parrish. He sees these instruments as part of something much bigger, a history which he says he reveres. Glenn Altshuler is the author of All Shook Up, How Rock and Roll Changed America.
Instruments were integral to rock and roll, not only because they produced the sounds of rock and roll, but because they were props in the performance. So guitars, for example, were frequently thought of and used as phallic symbols.
When rock and roll first appeared, parents were alarmed. Artists from Chuck Berry to Elvis Presley spurred a nationwide controversy. The panic from rock and roll is long gone. Today its legacy is respectable enough for major museums. Max Holian is director of the Met. He says the collection is right at home among the Greek and Roman statues.
The Met has probably the greatest collection of musical instruments in the world. So we've been researching musical instruments for decades. On the other hand, this is a show on rock and roll, which is a culture, a lifestyle, something that changed 20th century. And what we wanted to show is really the tools, the instruments that encapsulate that. It's a show about objects.
At the center of the exhibit, a glass case surrounds a stage with a band's instruments. It's the complete stage set of the 60s rock band The Who. Mick Parrish stands quietly staring at the drums, gleaming black, silver with neon paint. He says these instruments hold a special place for him.
This is mutually where we meet.
Yeah.
This is our altar.
This exhibition isn't about pomp. It's personal. While being able to see Pete Townshend's smashed Les Paul guitar is really cool, the people flocking to the Met might be looking for that limitless feeling, that kind they feel when they play their favorite song. The Play It Loud exhibition opens on Monday and continues until October 1st. Stephanie Horton, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Sophia Amati. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Alex Coletta.
Director Moira Warburton coordinated our studio production with Andrea Salcedo and Bianca Jacobone.
Our web team, Maddie Foley, got this stream live to the web. Ali Swenson produced the news, senior editor Shannon Lynn, and assistant editor Rebecca Ward led our copy team.
Our instructors Joanne Farian, Sally Herships, and Ben Shapiro advised our staff, along with Acacia O'Connor. I'm Hannah Critchfield.
And I'm Sachi McClendon. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us on uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.